We've seen an array allows us to have multiple values and accessing those values via index numbers. And it's sort of like having a list. However, we can have multi-dimensional arrays that might resemble more of a spreadsheet. You're probably very familiar with Excel and having rows and columns in a spreadsheet. And that's how a multi-dimensional or two-dimensional array works. I can declare an array of type integer called myArray and give it two values in the parentheses as far as its dimensions. The first one you might think of as the number of rows. So here we have 6, and we're going to get rows numbered with indices of 0 to 6. And then the second one is the columns. And I have two columns, 0 and 1. And I can assign values to those rows and columns, or those, in essence, cells, referencing the elements for both the row and the column. So my array 3, 1, for my array 3, 1, we're placing the value of 27. If we visualize this as a spreadsheet, that's going into row 3, column 1, starting with 0 as our count. My array 6, 0, putting 18 there. And you can see there in our table of where things are being placed. So think of a two-dimensional array as a spreadsheet or a table. And I can pull values from that two-dimensional array. So ABC as integer equals my array 3, 1, that's my value of 27, plus my array 6, 0, that's the value of 18, and ABC would equal 45. We can also initialize the array when we declare it. And there I don't specify the rows and columns. When I declare my array, in the parentheses I put a comma. And that comma tells me that there are two, this is going to be a two-dimensional array. Declaring it as integer and equal, and then in my curly brackets, I'm doing pairs of curly brackets with each, in essence, each row. And here we have columns 0 and 1, so 12 and 19 going in that first row of 0, 45 and 5 going into the second row of 1, 39 and 14, and so forth. And if I wanted to know what is the value of my array 4, 1, well, that's going to be a 30. Or my array 5, 0 is going to be 24. Now we're not limited to two-dimensional arrays. We can have a three-dimensional array. And here you might think of this, again going back to Excel, of we have a worksheet that has rows and columns, but there could be multiple tabs or multiple worksheets in that spreadsheet file. We might do something like this if we want to keep track maybe of temperatures over the course of a year. We might have a high and low column, that might be 0 and 1, and then indices from say 0 to 365 for each day of the year as our number of rows. But I want to keep track of that over maybe a 10-year period. So I might declare my temperatures as 365, 1, so 0 might be the high, 0 might be the low, and 1 might be the high, and then maybe a 9, which would give me 10 years from 0 to 9. So if I declare my array 4, 1, 0 equals 12, you can see that would be placed in that first, basically, table, row 4, column 1. 6, 0, 3 is going to go in the last table, or that fourth table, and placing 26 there in row 6, column 0. Now if I declare something like my array 5, 2, 1, that 2 does not exist. We only dimensioned in the second dimension 2 columns, 0 and 1. So that 2 is outside of the bounds, and I would get an error. So it's important to realize as you're working with arrays, when you get that out of bounds error, you're referencing an index that does not exist. And that is true in one-dimensional arrays as well. Let's take a look at an example of using a two-dimensional array. In this project, I have a fictional client called Residence Flippers that purchases homes, improves them, and sells them. And they have purchased 8 homes, made improvements, and sold them. They want to know what the profit is after their closing cost of 8.75% on the selling price, and what are the totals that they spent on purchasing improvements, how much have they sold, what's the closing cost total, and what's their total profit. I'm going to click the calculate button, and you can see here that their total profit's about $420,000. They made a profit on 7 of the 8 homes, but house G, they actually lost money on. And so it is shown in kind of a misty rose color and has parentheses around the value showing that it's negative. We see the totals there for the purchase improvement, sold price, closing cost, and profit. Let's take a look at the project. So I have for my project text boxes for the values here. They're being entered. So TXT purchase A, TXT improve A, TXT sold A, TXT closing A, and TXT profit A. And as you might guess, the next row is basically the same thing but with B's instead of A. So TXT purchase B and TXT profit B. Down here we have TXT profit H, and here we have TXT improve H. My totals are simply TXT purchase total, TXT improvements total or improved total, TXT sold total, TXT closing total, and TXT profit total, and a button named BTN calculate. Here's the code. So for BTN calculate, I'm going to create an array of values being double, and it's a two-dimensional array with 8 rows and 5 columns, so 7, 4. Then I have a loop. I'm going to go from 0 to 7. I'm going to go through each row of my houses, and I'm going to create 5 variables in this loop of purchase text box, improved text box, sold text box, closing text box, and profit text box. And I'm going to do that by finding the appropriate text box for that row. And I can set that equal to me.controls, that's our collection of controls, .item, and I can search for that item using its name. So here it's $, TXT purchase, and then I'm doing a CHR, that's the ASCII character of I plus 65. When I is 0, that's 65, that's a capital A. When I is 1, I plus 65, or 1 plus 65 is 66, that's a capital B, and so forth. That's going to give me those letters at the end of each of those text boxes. So I can do this in a loop using that string interpolation, finding the me.controls for the item and assigning it to a text box variable. My values then, assigning to our array, our two-dimensional array, element I sub 0 is going to be purchase text box.text converted to num only. And I've written a method down here called num only in which I strip out the $. Oftentimes work with financial figures, there's a tendency to put a $sign in front of those entered values. We're going to strip those out if they're there and return the double value, and that goes into our double value of the array. I do the same thing for the other 2 text boxes for improve and sold. Then values I element 3 is our cost of closing, and that's going to take the selling price I, 2 times 0.0875, that's 8.75%. And then my profit I, 4 is going to be the value of I, 2 minus the value of I, 0, that's our purchase, minus the value of I, 1, that's the improvement, minus the value of I, 3, that's the closing cost. And I want to show the closing cost and the profit then in those 2 text boxes, and I'm going to convert those to strings. And if the profit is positive, we're going to set the color of the text box, the back color, to light green. If it's a negative, we've lost money in the house, misty rose. That will populate my entire array for all 40 values, 8 rows and 5 columns. Then I want to calculate the totals. I have a method called show totals. I'm going to pass it my array of values. So I can pass arrays in the show totals method. It's a sub-procedure. It's not going to return anything, but it's going to accept values as my values as a two-dimensional array. Notice the comma here as double. So it's going to transfer all the values, all the items from values into my values. And then I created another array here. Dim totals is double equals, and I have 5 elements of 0. Those are going to be my totals in that last row. For I as an integer equals 0 to 7, I'm going to go through the 8 rows of my table array. And then for j, nested loop as integer equals 0 to 4, that's going to be the columns. And totals element j, that's going to be the totals at the bottom, I'm going to increment that by my values I element j. So each time through each row, I'm going to increment the totals for that house until I get through all 8 houses and I've got my 5 totals. Then all I need to do is display those 5 totals and I'm going to convert those double values to a string as currency and place those into the text of the 5 text boxes. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the Programming Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.